Welcome to 10 Meaningful Minutes. My name's Laurie LaComb, and thanks for joining us today. I am here with Aaron Ragon. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, Laurie.
You brought a friend.
How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm good. How are you?
I'm great.
You're great?
Stoked to be doing the show. Today, I am honored to present Jennifer Gottschalk. She is an accomplished author and writer. As a parent, I have a son who loves to read. He also has an interest in writing. This is why Jennifer's here today, is to talk to parents about how to encourage your kids to write, how to help them to have a love of not only reading, but expressing their own creative impulses. So thank you for being here, Jennifer.
It's my pleasure to be here. I'm thrilled.
This is so important. The writing is challenging for kids. I have 5 kids myself, and watching them grow as writers, it's difficult, it's challenging. What do you feel that developing writers really need, Jennifer?
Thank you so much for asking that question, because it's what I think about pretty much every day. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a teacher I was working with, and I was well down the road into this work. This is a 6th grade teacher in our district, and I'm doing a demo lesson. So what I do, which is, and I'm just going to make everyone jealous because my job is so cool, is what I do is I go in and I partner with the teacher, and I say, okay, cool, I can teach your kids all these things, and I offer like a Google form, and I'm like, tell me what they want to learn, and then I'll come in and meet them and do a demo lesson, and we'll see how it goes. So I'm doing an intro lesson, kind of teaching the way I teach, which is super visual with lots of pop culture references and lots of little bits and pieces of fun writing that feels like play. And the teacher and I get done, and I think her students go to specials, we debrief, and she's like, wait a second, this is how I teach reading. And I was like, tell me more. And she said, well, I want all my students to be lifelong readers. So I give them all these choices, and I want to make sure that they know all the things that are possible to read and all the things that reading does. But I've never one time thought about teaching writing like that. And I was like, that is the only way I know to teach writing, is to do tons of invitations, tons of let's try it, tons of I wonder how the author did that. And that conversation led me to a place where we have to start thinking, like you said, Aaron, when you have a really great reader, you can admire reading for the sake of its art, right? Like you would admire, paintings in a museum, and the way you might admire music at a concert. But people learn how to paint by approximating what great painters did, and people learn how to play musical instruments by approximating both the skills and the techniques of what great musicians do. But we need to do that as writers, and we rarely give kids that permission to just play around and be silly and try the things that they really admire. So I think the number one thing developing writers need is a sense of freedom and a sense of play connected to their natural inclination to tell stories. One of my favorite things about one of the curricula we use here in the district is that it starts very young, like kindergarten, 1st grade, with this idea that we are making books. And it asks kids, well, what do you know about? And it's really pretty funny when you ask kids what they know about, because you may not get things that are always 100% okay for school. Like one of my friends has a story about asking a kindergarten student that, and she was like, well, I know how to give my cat medicine. And then she drew mostly pictures, but like with invented spelling. But she was really, for her, that was a very relevant thing to write down, because not everybody obviously knows how to give her cat medicine. But there's other people who are like, my life is boring. I don't really want to write about anything. I want to write about, dinosaurs. Well, I was teaching this 4th grade classroom a couple of years ago about fan fiction. And this little boy said, okay, you know that movie, that hockey movie? I'm going to write about that, but with dinosaurs. And I was like, yes, that is the story I want to read. And then I was in a different classroom, and the little girl came up to me and she said, I want to write Lady and the Tramp, but with pigs. And I was like, do the pigs die? And she said, no. And I was like, perfect. I can't wait to read that story. And that is like, kids read about things that are fun and interesting and funny to them. And so permission to play, have fun, and be silly. And as adults, the more that we can say yes to those ideas. I mean, I have some boundaries, which I can share with you that I always share with students, but as much as we can say yes with the things that are okay for school, the more production and experimentation and joy we will get out of our developing writers. And then later when we're like, okay, we need to harness all this awesomeness and we're going to move it over here into some other content kinds of writing, like how we write in science class. But we've already felt like writing was fun. We've already felt like writing was something that we could do. And then we come over here and we're like, oh, okay, I can write up my chemistry lab now because I was actually thinking about chemistry on Mars. And you're like, yes, thank you. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's a long answer, but it's that fun and that connection to my own interests that are internal to me. I think that's a key for our developing writers.
Well, I think every student will thank you for saying that. Because, watching again my children develop, a lot of them are like, is it exactly the way it's supposed to be? It's supposed to be expository. It's supposed to be narrative. Do I have the right formula? And the fact that create your own formula. It's okay. So thank you for that advice for parents to hear from you. Yeah. Do you have any resources that maybe you could share with us today that we as parents and maybe teachers also could use to help motivate our writers?
Yeah, I brought some books with me, and then I think we'll get like a fancier look at them later. But part of the trick is that people think that writing doesn't really develop as a skill until people are adults. So 95% of the resources for learning how to write fiction specifically are written for adults. So I brought 4 that I have that are not for adults. And I'm going to start with one that's been around a long time, which I know you can find in the library. So this is called Writing Magic by Gail Carson Levine. You might know her because she wrote Ella Enchanted, which was either a Newbery Honor book or won the Newbery Award, and it was also made into a film. What's really cool about this book, call it written for like 3rd through 6th, is she'll talk about an idea, and at the end of almost every chapter, she'll invite the student, the reader, to try something, and she'll say, have fun, and save what you wrote. So I always tell my students, write down today's date and write down, do whatever you're writing, because I need you to keep all of your writer's notebooks, because someday when you're famous and your writing is in the Smithsonian, we need to know what you were writing today. And so this is the first one I recommend for families. It's so friendly. And Gail Carson Levine is I think a real expert, right? The partner book to that is actually written by a local author, but for teens. So this is by Victoria Hanley, and it's called Seize the Story. Here's Victoria's name. It's also been around for a while, same idea. So we'll have an activity we'll have an idea, like this is, I think, about dialogue, and then we'll have some ways to try it. So it lets students because as we're developing our idea about storytelling, one of the things that happens sometimes is we'll be telling a story and it's not funny to the people we're telling it to, or it's not scary, or it's not whatever it is. And so then we want to know, well, how does a writer do that? And that's what these books start to answer, as they get a little bit deeper into the idea of that craft. The other 2 things I brought are newer. This one I just found out about, and I was, I think, telling you about it, Erin. So there's this group of people call themselves the Story Pirates, and they're an improv group. So kids can go on their website, can go online and give them ideas, and then they'll improv them out into these really funny stories. But 3 times they had contests for kids to give us an idea for a full novel. So this is one of the novels, and it's in the genre of fantasy. And you can see right here, it says based on an idea by Angie Ortiz. So this is like a little girl who wrote into them with her idea. And then, so here's what's so cool. So they wrote a novel based on this child's idea, but then you can kind of see in the back where the bar is, these are all planning pages to write your own story like this. So, which is really, really cool. So we're all, those of us who are teachers, we never write on anything, but there are actually templates and stuff and things you could kind of scribble around again, and to practice the how, to practice the craft, the structure of how do I write a story? I think this is fantasy. And then the other thing I brought, which is new this year, this is from an amazing nonprofit called National Novel Writing Month, abbreviated NaNoWriMo, which is November for the uninitiated. Almost everything on their website is free. But if you don't always want to be going back and forth to the website, this book came out this year, and it's got the most incredible foreword written by Jason Reynolds, the award-winning. He writes verse novels, and he's such a phenomenal writer. So it's worth it for the Jason Reynolds foreword alone. But basically it just walks you through the process of writing what we would call long form fiction. So those are the 4 resources that I brought today that are all really age appropriate for kids in grades 3 through 8. For our high school students, certainly the stuff in NaNoWriMo will get them started. And then I will just give you one other name. There's a man who is a literary agent, an author, and a teacher, and his name is Donald, Donald, and his last name is Maass, and it's Maass. And he's written multiple books on the craft of writing fiction that I think are really appropriate for our high school students. The reason I wouldn't recommend them for younger students is some of the mentor texts he uses are books that are for adults, like Mystic River. So I wouldn't want to have to explain the plot of Mystic River to a 9-year-old, but you make that decision as a parent. Every parent has different rules and sort of frames for how they're, what they have in their home in terms of novels or fiction. And Donald Maass is generally pretty good, but that way you can kind of pick and choose.
Jennifer, what a great list. I wrote down a couple that I'm going to try and go pick up myself, but also there's a list of those for our listeners, because that was beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Sharing your expertise with us.
I'm wondering, Jennifer, your passion, your accomplishment in this area, I think is really going to be inspiring to not just kids, but maybe to some of the adult listeners who have a secret dream of writing a book. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious, how did you get into this? How did it begin?
I was teaching at Crest Hill Middle School, and my students, I taught 7th and 8th grade at the same time. Like I was a looping teacher, so I would have students for 2 years. And my students would always talk to me about what they were reading. And I was distraught in a way by some of them shifting so quickly into books written for adults, because sometimes they would be like, have you read La La La? And I was like, I have, but I can't talk to you about it because it's really not okay for school. And that felt bad, right? So I thought, well, darn. And one of the things that actually Beverly Cleary said, if you all remember Beverly Cleary, she says, if you don't see the book on the shelves, then you must write it. And so I was thinking about that in my head, and I was writing with my students, and then my job changed. So I left the classroom and became what back then was a building resource teacher, or what we would call now our professional learning specialist. And I supported all the gifted and talented teachers in the district. So I supported like 88 teachers, but I wasn't teaching my own class. What I know now, and you all probably listening are like, well, duh. But sometimes I have like these blinding flashes of the obvious that are kind of embarrassing that I just figured it out. But anyway, so what I just figured out that year was that teaching is a powerfully creative act. And coaching is different. It's not that it's not creative, but it's different. And I needed to create. So I was sitting around like almost like a wellness check, like, what's wrong with me? Something's not right. And I have this dear friend who's like a yoga instructor, and he does some really cool work with mindfulness-based stress reduction in veterans. But he said, have you read this book, The Artist's Way? And I was like, no. And he was like, well, you should check it out. But I was like not sure. So I like bought a used copy. That's a true story, because I didn't want to commit to like a brand new copy in case I hated it. So I bought a used copy. And one of the things The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron as the author has you do is do this thing called morning pages. So you get up in the morning and you just brain dump. Here's the other cheat I did, and I've told this story so everyone knows, is I was like, 5 pages, that's a lot, I'm busy. So I bought like a tiny notebook, like seriously, like half the size of this to cheat my 5 pages. And I wrote in cursive, because in the classroom when I was writing with students, I didn't want them to read over my shoulder and be able to know what I was writing. So I developed this really loopy, ugly cursive. So I'm writing sloppy cursive in this little notebook, but it worked. So every morning I got up and I wrote my 5 pages, and I felt a little bit better. And after about 5 months, I woke up, and instead of writing what I had been writing, I wrote this dream that I had. And the dream was about this teenager who was coming back from like the front of a battle. And it wasn't related to anything I'd been reading or viewing. And that dream became the first chapter of my first novel. So basically what happened was I wrote every day, I got in the habit. Then I woke up and wrote something that wasn't about like my cat or my job or anything. It was something completely from my imagination. And then every day afterward, I got up and I kept writing that story. Because what Stephen King says in his book on writing, which for the adults listening is phenomenal, he says he doesn't plan, if you guys didn't know that. By the way, let's just not, you will be appalled at how many writers don't plan. I'm going to go with over 60%. And people who are on the shelves of King Supers right now, like big names. So Stephen King does not plan. He gets up every morning, he reads what he wrote the day before, and he looks for the next part of the story. And I was like, well, it's good enough for Stephen King. It's good enough for me. And so that's how I wrote my first book. Every morning at the kitchen table, on paper, not typing. And I kept it a secret because writing a novel in some ways is like worse than telling people that you're on a diet, because everyone's going to ask. They're going to be like, hey, how's the going? Or how's that novel? And you want to be like, no, don't talk about the novel. So I didn't even talk about it until it was done. 2 years later, kids always ask, like, how long does it take to write a book? Now it takes about 6 months. But back then it took 2 years because I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't plan anything. And I was just like, la, 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 this is my secret time in the kitchen, So that's how I got started. So I really was doing what I was telling you. I was playing. It was for myself. I just wanted to see what would happen. But I was thinking about, would this be a book that would occupy that space for that really bright, capable reader between when they leave the books that people tell them are for them and go to adults? That was really how it happened. So I know it's a little bit of a long story, but that is.
It's a well-told story. It's a great story.
That bathrobe got a lot of miles.
Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today. You have inspired us, and I'm sure our listeners, and how wonderful that you can go model your art in front of teachers and share it with students in your role here. So anyway, thank you. Thank you, listeners. Make sure you check out our resources so you can see a list of the amazing books that we're presented today. So
thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was a wonderful opportunity. I appreciate it.